Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Yevamot, 1 week at a time. This is our 10th class together. We are going to be reviewing Daf 65 through 71 in today's class, and we are actually going to be finishing the 6th and the 7th chapter together today. Um, we are getting towards the end of Yivamot. We will be finished in the beginning of July. So if anybody is excited about that siyum, it is coming up. Okay, let's begin on Daf 65. Last week we ended with a discussion about what creates what's called a chazaka. Chazaka is the fact that something has been proven either twice or three times, and that creates a halachic reality. So we ended last week discussing whether it's two times or three times, and we ended up seeing that the halacha, the law, is that um, for marriage and for lashes, it's two times. For patterns of the period, and when we were talking about an ox that gores, it's three times. So Daf 65 begins by telling us that a woman who was married and didn't have children, and then got divorced and got married again and still didn't have children, she can marry a third man if he already has children, because as we mentioned, and we will mention again today, he has the obligation to have children, and if he already has children, they can get married. If she married a third man without children, and she didn't tell him that she hasn't had children yet, then she needs to get divorced, and she does not get her ketuvah. Again, the ketuvah is the arrangement that when there is a divorce, if there is a divorce, the man needs to support the wife and give her a certain amount. If there is some sort of I don't want to call it fault, but let's say some sort of miscommunication on her part, then she loses the ketuvah money, meaning she doesn't get it. He doesn't have to pay it. However, interestingly, she can ask for the ketuvah by saying that the first two husbands, they were the ones that were infertile, not her. And now she's older, and that could be why she's not having children. And this leads to an interesting conversation. If she can go back, what if she gets married and actually has a child with the new husband? Can she go back to her previous husband where she lost the ketuvah money, and can she go back and say, look, it wasn't my problem, it was your problem, give me the ketuvah money? The Gemara explains that it's actually dangerous for her to try this, because he can say that he never intended to divorce her, like he can take back the fact that he divorced her. And then, if that happens, it would be that she was never actually divorced from the previous husband, and her child from this new husband would actually end up becoming a mamzer, because she was retroactively never married, which is a problem. And therefore, the Gemara says better not to go back to the original husband and ask for the ketuvah. Um, I think very progressively, the Gemara tells us that we believe a woman if she says that the man is infertile, meaning the Gemara explains that she can feel when they have relations, and she can feel if, again, this is not talking about, I guess, the quality, but maybe the quantity. And interestingly, the Gemara gives the woman the power to say it's him and not her. Whereas, and therefore she can get a ketuvah if they get divorced, if they don't have children. Or he can decide to marry another woman and to see if it's him or it's her. So it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion about fertility in this Masechet. If the court forces him to divorce her, he can claim that there was a miscarriage, and then she can say, no, there wasn't. Remember, again, they have 10 years. The 10 years is calculated from whenever, either from the beginning of the marriage, or it starts again if, unfortunately, if there was a miscarriage. The Gemara says that the court always believes the woman, meaning if she says, no, there was never a miscarriage, meaning that the clock started from when they got married or from when they started to have children, they believe her. And okay, the next Mishnah tells us, and this is really the source that we've been mentioning until now, that it is the man that is commanded in procreation, in the mitzvah of pru uravu, of having children, or the Mishnah says maybe it's on both the man and the woman. The Gemara explains why would it only be on the man? It's based on the verse in Breshit, in Genesis, where God commands man to have children. And the next part of the verse is, and then you will conquer the land. So the Gemara explains the men conquer the land. Therefore, it must be that the men are the ones that are commanded in procreation. Or it's from the fact that Yaakov was commanded in the singular, right? Because pru uruvus seems to be in the plural, which we would think would be for the man and the woman. The Gemara says no. It could be just the man, and in the case of Yaakov, the commandment is in the singular. From here, very interestingly, the Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent and explains that one can change, right? We understand there's a value of telling the truth and that lying is bad. But the Gemara tells us here that one can change the facts if it's going to bring about peace. Definitely peace between a husband and a wife, or peace between brothers, right? What we would call shalom bayit, right? The peace in the house. What's the proof? One is, there are actually three proofs. One is where the brothers of Joseph claim that that Jacob told them to tell Joseph not to hurt them. And that's not true, meaning Yaakov never said this. But the brothers kind of, mislead Yosef because they're concerned that Joseph is going to want to take revenge for the fact that they sold him. And therefore, it's okay that they, misspoke or kind of changed the truth. The second case is when God actually tells Shmuel the Navi, that he can lie if Shaul stops him and asks him where he's going. He was actually going to anoint the next king, which is David, but he knew that if Shaul would stop him, he would kill him if he found out. And God tells him he can change, fib and not say exactly where he's going. And the last one, I think very famously, is when God actually changes what Sarah says. When God tells Avram and Sarah that they are going to have a child, he first tells Sarah, and Sarah laughs, right, from the word litzchok. That's why her son is called Yitzchak. But she says, what do you mean we're going to have a child, right? My master, meaning Abraham, is very old, right? There's no way we're going to have a child. And when God goes back and tells Abraham what happens, he says, oh, Sarah said, we are old, right? So God himself changed the facts in order to make sure that there is peace between the husband and the wife. And the Gemara tells us that the halacha, the law, is that only the man is commanded. I have sometimes students are very upset by this. Sometimes people are comforted by this. The women, I think that I don't know. I don't know the reasons exactly, but interestingly, we'll see a few cases here at the bottom of 65 of stories of women who want to get their ketuvah because they don't have children, and they say, look, we're not commanded, so why should we not get our ketuvah? We did what we could. And then the Gemara says, no, maybe they're getting it for another reason. And the last case on 65 is a woman who decides after having a child or twins. Actually, she asks if she is um, um, if she is obligated in procreation in pru'urvu, and Rabbi Chia says she is not, and therefore she took some sort of drink. She did something to sterilize herself. Maybe it was to protect herself, but she was able to do that because she was not obligated in procreation in pru'urvu. Okay, with that we are going to finish the sixth chapter on Daf 66, and we're going to move to the seventh chapter. Here we're going to learn about the acquisitions of a woman vis-a-vis her husband. So let's start from the beginning. When a woman is single, anything that she acquires, meaning she has a job, she finds something on the street, anything that she takes into possession, is either hers or her husband or her father's. Once she gets married, anything that she acquires goes directly to the husband. Now, what about when she comes into a marriage? Let's say the woman comes into a marriage with certain property. There are two categories of property of the woman. One is called nichsei milog. Milog is the property that's called milog, are things that she's bringing into the marriage, and she retains full ownership of this property, of this item. However, her husband gets the fruits of these things. So let's give an example. Let's say the woman has a cow and she brings it into the marriage. And again, this is all going to be stipulated in the marriage contract. It says she's bringing in the cow as a malog. Therefore, the cow is hers, but the husband can drink the milk. Right? The husband cannot decide to sell it for the meat. It's not his to sell, but he can reap its benefits. However, let's say the cow dies, the husband doesn't have to repay the wife, meaning it's her cow that died. The next type of property is called son barzel, which the word really means iron sheep. But what happens is this property she brings into the marriage. Again, this is all written down in the marriage contract, and the value of these possessions is recorded, and the husband now takes what's known as, I guess, full ownership of these things. And if they get divorced, she gets the value of what she brought in. So, however, she does not get any increase of value. And if the thing, let's say it was sheep, let's say the sheep die, the husband needs to repay her because it was almost like on loan to him, and she gets that value when she leaves. So we'll talk about the details of this in a minute. But one more thing to understand is anything she brings in automatically is melog. Again, melog is the first type, which means she retains ownership. He can use it, right? So let's say she has a field of, an orchard of oranges. She she brings that into the marriage. The husband can eat the oranges, but she retains possession of the orchard itself. Okay, so now unless right, and then if they stipulate that something is Tson Barzel, so then it becomes Tson Barzel. Okay, let's get to the Mishnah. That was the introduction. Let's get to the Mishnah on Daf 66. So the Mishnah tells us that if a widow marries a high priest, right? A Kohen Gadol marries a widow. We know this marriage is not okay. It is prohibited. But they do it anyway. So now what happens? Um, the Mishnah tells us that her sleeves that are melog, again, she retains the ownership, so they cannot eat truma. Just a reminder, truma is sanctified food that the priests eat and anybody who is in their household, meaning a priest's wife and children and slaves, meaning everybody on the property can eat it. However, first of all, this relationship is not okay, the widow with the high priest, and she retains ownership. Therefore, it's as if they're not really married, and therefore her slaves do not eat truma. But her slaves that are tzon barzel, those do go into the high priest's possession, and therefore they do eat from the truma. Next case, a regular Jewish girl, meaning not a Kohen, she's a Bat Yisrael. She marries a Kohen, right? Regular, she happens to marry a Kohen. All the slaves eat truma. If a daughter of a Kohen marries a Yisrael, meaning a regular Jewish man, not a Kohen, all the slaves do not eat truma, right? She, when she was in her home with her father, she ate truma because she's from a priestly family. Now that she gets married to a non-priest, everything becomes his, and therefore they don't eat truma anymore. Okay, that's our Mishnah. So the Gemara explains or asks, why is this the case? The Gemara says that all the slaves are really his property. And the wife, let's go to the first case, the widow and the high priest. The wife can't eat truma because this union is not okay, it's prohibited. Therefore, since she can't eat, she can't transfer the ability to eat truma to her property. That's one option. Another option is really, according to biblical law, they can eat. But the rabbis made a decree so that they can't eat, so that she'll realize that she shouldn't have married him in the first place, and then maybe they'll get a divorce. Um, Okay. The next, we said that the nechse milog, she takes back when they get divorced, right? That was the thing that he takes full ownership of, but if they get divorced, she gets to take it back. So now what happens if he wants to keep the item and just pay her back? Let's say she brings in beautiful candlesticks. Now, unfortunately, they get divorced. She wants to take it back. And he says, no, I want to keep the candlesticks. I'll give you the value of the candlesticks, that we wrote down in the original contract. What do we do? So we said, if he was totally responsible for the item, right, if it's Tzon Barzel, then it's his, and he can decide to keep it, and of course he has to pay back the value. And from here, there's a discussion about who really owns the item. And that we bring a case that if a slave that's Tzon Barzel, again, our second category, the one that he takes full ownership of or responsibility, that if that slave is injured by the man, then he goes free. The man is seen as his owner. But if she injured him, he doesn't go free, right? So that proves that the items that are tzon barzel are really under the man's ownership during the time that they are married. However, says the Gemara, the other side of that coin is that the man can't sell those items. Let's go back to those candlesticks. He can't decide in the middle of the marriage, I don't like them anymore. I want to sell them. He doesn't have the right to sell them because, right, again, she brought it in and she wants to take them out. So that seems to imply that he doesn't have full ownership. So the Gemara says that the law is, the halacha is, that she can take the item back and she needs to collect it meaning she needs to physically take them back. And if there are, let's say he dies, she needs to quickly take those things. Otherwise, right, the orphans can actually take it as like an inheritance and do something quickly. The Gemara gives the example they can use it. Let's say it was, I don't know, she had a very fancy garment and they decide to make it into shrouds for the father who died. That would work. So you have to be very careful that if she wants it, she needs to take it quickly before they do something that will make her not be able to take it back. But either way, she gets the value. Daf 67 continues that if the item increases in value, she can only take the original value, right? That's again the difference. With Milog, she takes back the item. It doesn't matter if it got better or worse. She takes back the item. With Tsona Barzel, she gets the item, but if it increased in value, she would have to compensate him for that value. She would have to pay the difference, and then she can take everything. Okay, the next Mishnah. One second. The next Mishnah is okay. The following case. Here we go. Here's the Mishnah. A Bat Yisrael, meaning a regular Jewish girl, not a priestly family, not from a priestly family, marries a Kohen, and then he dies, and she was pregnant. One second. Sorry, he died when she was pregnant. Um, okay. And now the question is, what happens to the slaves that they owned, right? So the slaves that are Tsona Barzel cannot eat truma. Now, she will see the case on this slide has living sons and the pregnant wife. First, let's just do the pregnant wife, and then we'll get to the living sons. If she's just pregnant, no other children. Now, it's important to understand if there is a living child, if there's a living son, then she can continue eating truma because of the son. The son is a Kohen. He can feed his mother truma. But now we have a pregnant woman at the time of death. So the question is, do we see the fetus as strong enough to continue or to feed them truma or not? So according to Rabbi Yossi, again here you can see. So according to Rabbi Yossi, hold on 1 minute. Okay, wait, no, don't look at the chart yet. So we said the slaves cannot eat truma. Next case is a bat Kohen, meaning a daughter of a Kohen, who got married to a I have written to a Kohen, but okay, she gets married, he died, she's pregnant. Again, the slaves of Tsona Barzel cannot eat truma. So now the Gemara asks, why is this? What's going on here? So it says either because the fetus is in the Bat Yisrael, meaning in the first case, is considered a non-Kohen, or only born children can feed the mother or her property truma, but not the fetus. As we mentioned, there needs to be a living child in order for the mother to continue to eat truma, and not a fetus. The sages say that if the Kohen had other children, and we're going to get to the chart in a minute, if the Kohen had other children, so then the slaves do eat truma, or only if there are brothers can the slaves eat. right? Or maybe it's because of the whole family that these slaves can eat. So again, here the Gemara says it's not clear. It's a machloket or a disagreement if the fetus can acquire things, right? The mother is pregnant. Does the fetus acquire the possessions, right, the inheritance of the father or not? So a Braita says that if she was widowed pregnant, right, none of her slaves can eat truma, but if he leaves behind children and the pregnant widow, the ovdei melog can eat truma. Sona Barzal cannot. So again, let's just review. The melog are the ones that are really in her possession, and the Tsona Barzel are in what happens. It wasn't in the husband's possession. He died. Now, officially, they are now in the fetus's possession, right? That fetus is the heir, but the fetus hasn't been born yet. So now it becomes complicated, and therefore they cannot eat truma till that fetus is born as and officially acquires the inheritance. The entitles one to eat truma, and a son doesn't, right? Let's say if she's pregnant and has children. So we'll see a daughter and a son. So the first the Gemara says a daughter entitles, a son doesn't. And if he leaves sons, so then the slaves can eat truma. If he leaves only daughters, the slaves cannot eat truma. So now we have to understand why that is. So the case is maybe it's because the mother is pregnant with a male child. Again, let's say the husband dies. There are living daughters and a fetus, right? We don't know the sex of the fetus, if it's male or female, right? If it's male, then it will inherit everything. And then, again, as we said, a fetus cannot acquire anything yet. Therefore, the slaves cannot eat truma. Um, and then let's continue. Okay, the court can assign inheritance to the fetus, and um, other than the other than the slaves that are tsona barzel, and then they can eat. Right? It could say really the fetus cannot acquire on its own, but the court can give it to the fetus, and therefore the slaves can eat. Um, so now we mentioned that daughters entitles one to eat truma and sons don't. That doesn't really make sense to us. So the Gemara tells us what's that specific case. The case is where there's a very small estate. And this is inheritance law. If this estate is very small, then, right, and there's daughters, and there's let's say a daughter and a son, the daughter gets supported by the estate and the son has to go and ask for charity, right? And that's the case where, right, again, the sons don't get anything in that case. um, and therefore the daughters can make it that the mother's slaves will eat truma as opposed to the son. Whereas the end of the Braita explaining how the sons can make the slaves eat truma, but the daughters can't, that's dealing with an estate that's much larger. If there's a large estate enough to support the daughters, then the sons get everything else. That's called the inheritance, and then they're able to um, um, get the slaves to be able to eat truma. I hope that that was clear. The next Mishnah. We now have a Bat Kohen. Again, the girl is from a priestly family, and she marries a Yisrael, a regular Jew. Um, Okay. And she is pregnant, and then she's widowed, and now the Yavam, right, the brother of the husband who died, um, he, right, she is Wait, hold on one second. Hold on. Let's do the case again. She's widowed. Okay. Sorry. Let's start again. A a bat Kohen and a Yisrael. She is going to be disqualified. Okay, sorry. Scratch that. Start one more time. A woman who is from the Kohen family. When she is single, she eats truma. When she marries a man who is a Yisrael, she cannot eat truma. So she um, cannot eat truma if she's pregnant and he died, right? Because again, if right when she gives birth, now again the idea is that she's now connected to a non-Kohen, therefore she cannot go back to her father's house to eat truma. Another case is if the husband died and she has to do yibum. If she has to do yibum, so then she cannot go back to her father's house to eat truma. Also, if she was engaged, or she was um, or she was married to a deaf boy who's over 9 years old, all of these things disqualify her from eating truma. We mentioned, I think we mentioned this already once, that a boy who is over 9, again, we know that to be an adult, you need to be 13 for a boy, but over 9 years old is significant, enough to disqualify her from um, from eating truma. If the husband and his so the next case is if a husband and his other wife, right, die, and you don't know who died first. Um, Remember, we talked about the tzara does chalitza because we're not sure who died first, the co-wife or the husband. Okay, let's get to the Gemara at the bottom of 67. The Gemara tells us that the bat Kohen, if she's divorced or widow and childless, then she can go back to her father's house and eat truma again. And if you have a Bat Yisrael, a regular Jewish woman, if she has a child from the Kohen and then she's widowed, she can still eat Truma because of this child, but not if she's pregnant, right? That's what we learned before. Again, let's go to Yibum, right? We're going to go through each case. With Yibum, the Bat Yisrael and the Kohen, the Yavam, right? Let's say he died and now she has to do Yibum. The Yavam, who's a Kohen, right, doesn't entitle her to Truma till they get married. So she can't eat till she marries him, till they do Yibum, and then she can eat Truma. Let's go to Erusin, to engagement at the top of 68, right? If she's engaged, that creates a relationship. So again, if the Bat Kohen is engaged to the Yisrael, then she cannot eat Truma because there is already a relationship between the two. What about a Chayresh? If she's married to a deaf man, right? The 9-year-old is a separate case. Let's say she's married to a deaf man. Again, if she's a Bat Kohen who's married to a deaf Yisrael, so then he disqualifies her from eating truma because he is not a Kohen. And if it's a Bat Kohen, right? If it's a Bat Yisrael who's married to a Kohen who's deaf, he can't give her the ability to eat truma because it's not a full-fledged marriage. Remember, we said that, and this is just important to understand, when we're talking about a deaf person in the Gemara, we're talking about a deaf mute, right? Someone who cannot communicate at all. Nowadays, I think the law would be different because a person who is deaf is able to communicate nowadays. Therefore, I would imagine that that person can be married on a biblical level, but I'm not exactly sure. But I think it is different. Again, what about a 9-year old, right? 9 plus 1 day. Again, if it's a yavam, right? If it is the boy has to do yibum, biblically it works. If he does yibum, um, it becomes it is yibum, but he's not old enough to give her the ability to eat truma. Okay, or it is the let's say this child who's 9 plus years old. Let's say that child is pasul, meaning a mamzer, or is not allowed to get married. That child does invalidate a woman with relations, meaning according to Jewish law, the relations of a 9-year old is enough to affect whatever effect we're trying to have. If the case is positive in terms of yibum, it works, but also in the negative side, even if it's prohibited, it also works. Um, Okay. The Gemara says anyone whose children are pasul, right? Again, are not able or prohibited to marry a kohen. So it also makes the wife pasul. She cannot now marry another kohen. Or anyone whose daughter can marry a kohen, his widow, right? You can marry his widow. And of course, this is based on a verse because it says, right, a non-Kohen can't eat truma. It says it twice. One to teach us the just the points, the in context, and the second is to teach us that the daughter of a Kohen plus a non-Kohen, a zar, cannot eat truma, right? She can't continue to eat truma after she marries a Yisrael. If he dies or they're divorced without children, she can go back to her father's house to eat truma, but she can't eat the priestly meat. There are certain parts of the animal that were given as gifts to the priest that she cannot eat, but she can eat truma. Okay, next case that, hold on 1 minute. Okay, let's go to Daf 69, which tells us that when we're talking, right, again, Rabbi Akiva tells us that according to Rabbi Akiva, right, he says there's no kiddushin, right? You can't betroth one another if we're talking about prohibitions on a negative level, not just karet, but on a lower level. He interprets the pasuk as having relations and not just betrothing. As we said, the widow without children can marry a kohen and eat truma. Right? Again, if a woman is divorced and she's a bat kohen and she didn't have children, she can go back to her father and eat truma. What happens if the Kohen marries a divorcee? Again, he was not supposed to. So she now is pasul, which means that if she gets divorced, right, that basically she cannot marry another Kohen, and the child from that relationship is a halal, meaning not a priest, and again and can be okay. That child can disqualify another woman that if he's not allowed to marry her. Meaning, so that child is a halal, but also a kohen, and is not allowed to marry another woman. If he does, he will invalidate that woman as well. Okay. Okay, let's continue in the Gemara. That the Gemara says that there's a machloket if the focus is on the fact that the act of having relations makes the wife pasul, meaning invalid, or it's the focus is on the fact that the relationship makes the child invalid, right? Or maybe it's about the fact that the daughter, again, the daughter is pasul and can't marry a kohen, and that would be the problem. Okay, the next Mishnah. Um, Okay. The next Mishnah discusses seduction or rape. Again, as we've mentioned previously, the Gemara is not saying that these things are okay. I don't even think that the Mishnah is trying to say that this is something that happens often. I think the Mishnah is trying to figure out the boundaries of the law. So the Mishnah tells us that if the seducer or a rapist or someone who's a shoteh, meaning doesn't have all his faculties, right, insane, these people do not do not invalidate the woman, and they don't make her able to eat truma, right? If they're forbidden to her, right, let's say they cannot marry into Israel, right? If they're a mamzer or something like that, they do passel her. Let's say a bat kohen sleeps with a Yisrael, she can still eat truma, right? We don't see it again. This is outside the context of marriage, and therefore she can still eat truma. But if she gets pregnant, then she cannot eat truma. If she loses the baby before she gives birth, she can go back to eating. She can eat truma. If we have a kohen who is with a bat Yisrael, she cannot eat truma. Again, we're talking about premarital relations. Again, if she gets pregnant, she cannot eat. If she gives birth, she can eat because, again, the child is now a kohen, and then she can eat truma because of the child. So we see here that the child is stronger than the father. If a slave has relations with a woman, it does invalidate her. If a man sleeps with a female slave, a shifcha, and then she has a son, the son is considered a slave, right? It goes according to the mother. If the man's mother, okay, this gets a little complicated, but okay. If again a man sleeps with a maidservant and they have a son, okay. Now, if the man's mother, meaning the grandmother of the baby, was a Yisrael who married a Kohen, and then, right, she married a Kohen, meaning that the man is a Kohen, and then the man died, and, right, so if her husband dies, right, she can't eat Truma. But, and, right, let's say the man dies, let's say her husband dies and her son, the Kohen, dies. Now she still has the grandson, but here the grandson is seen as a slave because it was born from a maidservant. Therefore, the son is not strong enough to give the grandmother truma. However, go the other way. If she was a bat Kohen who was married to a Yisrael and he died, so then she can go back to eating truma because her husband died, so and her son died, and the grandchild is not really hers, and therefore she can go back to eating truma. A similar case, if you have a mamzer, okay, so a mamzer does invalidate a woman if he has relations with her, but he can. It's called ma'achil. She can eat truma from him, right? So let's say a woman is married to a non-Jew, and a non-Jew or a slave, and then she has a son. Okay, the son is a mamzer, again, according to those who say that that is the case. Now, if the mother's mother, again, the same case. If the mother's, again, she now is the the free one, right? So the son is hers. Therefore, if the mother's mother was a woman who is married to a Kohen, so now the grandmother can go back to eating truma. And if the mother's mother was from a Kohen family, she was a Bat Kohen, she cannot eat truma because now the grandson is really hers, right? Because it goes according to the mother. I hope that this is not too. I mean, I know it's complicated, but I hope you guys are getting some of at least some of the content. Um, let's keep going. The Kohen Gadol, right, the high priest, sometimes he can be posel, he can invalidate the woman. His mother, right, continues to eat truma. His grandmother, right, doesn't eat truma because he, right, exists, right. Again, if she was a bat kohen who was married to a Yisrael, that was all one Mishnah. Let's just see what the Gemara has to say. Again, the widow of a minor or somebody who is insane doesn't need yibum or chalitza. Again, that marriage is not a valid marriage, and therefore you do not need yibum or chalitza. The Gemara now asks, why don't we wait 3 months to see if she, again, remember we said that, let's say she is, it says that she can eat truma or not. Why don't we wait 3 months to see if she's pregnant after there's, let's say, seduction or rape? The Gemara says we do not suspect that maybe she is pregnant. She will try to prevent that pregnancy, and therefore we don't have to wait those 3 months. Okay, or those 40 days right before she's the 40 days, the beginning of the pregnancy, don't invalidate her, and therefore, when you see that she's pregnant, that would be, she would have to either stop or continue. She would have to stop eating truma. What if, again, there's a fiance a man who has relations with his right fiance, the woman? There's a machloket. Again, if she gets pregnant, maybe the child is a mamzer or not. Maybe we don't know who the child is from. The Gemara says no, the child is kasher. They were already engaged. We assume that the child is from basically premarital relations. Daf 70 tells us again that for a mamzer, it again invalidates the other person, and based on a verse that again if that she can the woman bat kohen can go back and eat truma, and the kohen gadol can prevent the grandmother from eating truma, as we mentioned, and allow his mother, who was married to a kohen, to eat truma. And with that, we finish, I think, a very complicated 7th chapter. I'm sorry there weren't a lot of charts, but I think it would have just been even more complicated. Let's go to the last daf and a half. The next chapter is going to be discussing circumcision, brit milah. Again, a very important mitzvah. There will be a lot of details discussed in this chapter. So the Mishnah tells us on Daf 70 that an arel, the word arel means uncircumcised. So an uncircumcised priest or a priest who is tameh cannot eat truma, but his wife and slaves can. If he has had an injury to his genitalia, and the Gemara will discuss what this is, either to the member itself or to the testicles, he and his slaves can eat truma, meaning even he had, let's say he had a brit milah, but now he is injured, he can eat truma. And again, if he slept with his wife before this injury happened, so then she can eat truma. even after the injury. And the Gemara defines what those injuries are. The Gemara says continues that an arel is also not allowed to eat korban pesach. If you remember in Masechet Pesachim, we discussed how a man needed to get a brit milah before eating korban pesach. And we learn from there that also the uncircumcised man also cannot eat truma. It's based on a comparison between truma and korban pesach. From here, the Gemara mentions two types of Jewish slaves. A regular Jewish slave, it's important to understand that in the time where slavery was accepted, if a person could not pay a certain debt to another person, they would go into servitude up to 6 years. And on the seventh year, that slave would go free. That's called an acquisition of years, meaning it's limited. However, let's say that person decides, wait, I really like this gig, right? My master treats me very well, and I'm being fed and I'm clothed. I want to stay here forever. So then there's a procedure that's done, and that's called a kinyan olam, right? An acquisition that is forever. It's not really forever. It's till the Jubilee year, till Shnat Yovel, which is every 50 years. Again, God does not want the Jewish people to be enslaved. Therefore, they eventually go free. But a verse teaches that both these types of slaves cannot eat truma, right? Again, because the master doesn't really own him, right? We don't think that one Jew can own another, therefore he cannot eat truma. But by Pesach, and we see for Pesach as well. The next discussion is about an onen. Onen is someone who an immediate relative of theirs has died, and it is before the burial. After the burial, it's called an avel, a mourner. Onen is the step before that. This stage is very unique. I don't want to say the word severe, but unique in the sense that an onen cannot do commandments. So here, the Gemara tells us at the bottom of 70 that the onen can't eat the korban pesach, but he can eat truma, and that's learned from another source. And the Gemara says that we look at an arel, an uncircumcised person, versus an onen, and arel again is more severe. Therefore, the arel, the uncircumcised man, cannot eat truma, but the onen can. Daf 71 continues telling us again, the arel can't eat Pesach, but he can eat matzah and maror, right? He is part of the Pesach process, but cannot eat from the sacrifice. Okay, now the Gemara asks, what about an uncircumcised newborn, right? The first 8 days, the newborn cannot be circumcised. Can you use oil that is truma on the baby's skin? It's important to understand, I think this is very interesting, that putting oil on your body is like drinking or eating, right? You are consuming it. So putting truma oil is like eating truma. So the question is, would that be okay? Right? Again, the child is uncircumcised, but on the other hand, the child can't be circumcised. So what do we do? The Gemara then now brings certain different examples of babies that cannot be circumcised. And therefore, if they can't, then there is no obligation, right? So if, let's say, there's a baby who is sick and cannot get a brit, therefore there's no obligation, let's say, for korban pesach or for the father, right? If the father hasn't circumcised his children, he cannot eat from the korban pesach. But if the child can't be circumcised, then he can eat from the Korban Pesach. Interesting, the Gemara continues that an arel, the uncircumcised person, can sprinkle the mei chatat, the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, on someone who is impure. Remember, we discussed that if a person is impure from a dead body, right, tameh met, the process to get out of it would be sprinkling the ashes of the red heifer mixed with water. So the sprinkler could be an arel. And that is learned. Sorry. 1 second. Sorry. First, the Gemara tells us that the sprinkle right? The arel can be sprinkled on in order to make the arel pure. It can go through the purification process, even though he is uncircumcised. Just important, I think I didn't mention this. Why is this man uncircumcised? It's not that he doesn't believe in circumcision. Rather, it's probably because he cannot be circumcised. Generally, the reason given is hemophilia, right? He had 2 other brothers who died because of circumcision, meaning they bled out. Therefore, this child was not allowed to have a circumcision, and that is the arel we're talking about, right? We're not talking about someone who decides this is not for them. That is a different case altogether. But this is a Jewish person who keeps all the mitzvot, but they cannot medically get circumcised. They can be a part of the Jewish people, but again, there are certain things that they can do and certain things that they can't do. We learn that he can be sprinkled upon, meaning purified, from the nation of Israel in the desert, right? Because actually when they crossed the when they crossed the Jordan River into Israel, that happens with Joshua on the 10th of Nisan. Now, we know that after they crossed, they then did circumcision, and then they had Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. But we also know that they needed to be purified, and they have to be purified for 7 days, right? The process is day 3 and 7. They need to be sprinkled on. So it must be that day 3 they were sprinkled on before they got circumcised. And that proves that you can do the purification process on someone who is uncircumcised. From here, the Gemara talks about a procedure called Puri'ah. There are 2 parts to the circumcision process. One is removing the foreskin, and the other is uncovering the tip of the member. You need both of those things for Brit Milah, for it to be a proper circumcision. And we're just going to end with the Gemara explaining that the Jewish people in the desert for 40 years did not do circumcision. The question is why? One answer is because of the weakness of the journey, right? Again, they were going to be weak. You know that, we see with Abraham that on the 3rd day he's in a lot of pain. He's very weak. The Jewish people didn't know when they would have to move, when they would have to get up and go, and therefore they did not do circumcision during the time they were in the desert. Or the top of 72 tells us maybe it's because the northern wind didn't blow in the desert. And it seems that this northern wind is a healing wind. And because they didn't have this healing wind, they didn't do circumcision. And therefore, only once they entered Israel with Yehoshua on the 10th of Nisan, only after that could they do circumcision and be ready for the Korban Pesach. With that, I wish everybody a wonderful week and really a Shavua Tov and a Shabbat Shalom. And I hope it was not too complicated, or that you got at least some of the ideas, and really rest up. And we continue next week, Be'ezrat Hashem. Wishing you all a great week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Sorry I got confused on the time.